Section 1.2 in the chapter, How Do We Get Good Data, is all about measuring. Are we going to be able to measure something to get an accurate account of what's happening here? Okay, so here we're just going to do A really quickly. Our big idea here about measuring. So the definition for measurement is on page 24, and I didn't bother to write it down this time. You guys can just go back and look at it. It's right here in the blue box, measurement down there at the bottom. We measure a property of a person or a thing when we assign a number to represent the property. We often use an instrument to make a measurement. Okay, we may have a choice of units. We'll go over this, and the result of the measurement is a numerical variable that takes different values for people or things. Okay, so what I did is I broke that definition down into those three other words. So one, the instrument used to make a measurement. So this is pretty easy. If I were going to measure the paper from top to bottom, the instrument I would use would be a ruler, right? A ruler. That's fairly easy. It does get a little more complicated. We'll see with what we do today when we're talking about some surveys and stuff. But for right now, if we're going to measure our paper, we can use a ruler. Number two, units. Do we have a choice? If we are measuring this paper with a ruler, do we have a choice of units? Yeah, most of our rulers that we have, and the ones I have in the classroom, have 2 different units on it. Oh, 3 actually. You could use millimeters. Those are the really small ones. Centimeters. And on the other side are inches. Okay, so these would be the units that the instrument ruler uses. Okay, and the third word from that definition was variable, which we did go over in the first part of the chapter, but just to reiterate, variable, the results of your measurement. So if we measured this paper, the variable would be the length of that paper, 8.5 inches. I just happen to know this paper is 8.5 inches. The variable could also be, if you're thinking about it, what you would put on the X or Y axis if you were having to label those things when we drew a graph, right? When we do that, we always have the variables. X and Y are the variables. Those would be what you would write down there if you get stuck thinking about it. Okay, so the other things on the next page, on page 25, it starts talking about how are variables defined. How can we look at a variable? And it gives you 3 questions to ask. So I'm going to take these 3 questions. I wrote them down. They're also on page 25. And I'm going to look at example 1.12 at the bottom of page 25 in the blue box, measuring unemployment. And we're going to look at how each of these questions is answered when you're measuring unemployment. So question 1, how is a variable defined? How do we define unemployment? Well, when you actually read through that example, you will realize that it's pretty tricky. And if somebody's out of work because they're on strike, let's say, they're not counted as unemployed. If they are unemployed but have given up on finding a job, they are also not counted in the unemployment. Somebody who stays at home as a stay-at-home mom or dad, they are not counted as being unemployed. Okay, you have to be in the workforce. How exactly do they define it? Who are not available for work. Retired people, for example, students who do not want to work while in school, should not be counted as unemployed. So question 2 says, is that a valid way to describe unemployment, or should we take into account everybody that isn't working despite the fact that they don't want to work? That's a question that you can have a debate about. I think it's a good way to do it, but then I think people who remain unemployed long term but still would like to have a job or still trying to get a job should be able to still be counted, but they are not if they are unemployed for more than 6 months, even if they're still trying to get a job. They're not counted any longer in the unemployment measurement. And finally, question 3, how accurate are these measurements? Well, if you continue to read through measuring unemployment, to the next page, 26, it talks about how it's the same survey that they do every month to find that other information we talked about in chapter 1. For the life of me, I can't think of it. But so it's a survey about people. So how accurate is it? It depends on how accurately people are answering the survey. I know right now they're doing it online, and there's a cool graph about it here on the top of page 27 of when they first put it online, and about at the end of 1993 here, right before we get to 1994. And the online version was different than the version they were doing on paper, so they put a gap there. So even just changing the measurement instrument from a paper survey to an online survey, it changed the percent of unemployment we have. So you have to be careful there. We're going to do something in class with some more questions where we get to practice these. So for right now, in order for me to know that you watched this lecture, I'm going to ask you to, in the comment section, to please write down from example 1.1 on page 24. Could you write down the instrument that they use to measure college readiness? Can you write down the instrument that they use to measure college readiness?